What is shaken, Internet? This is Salt's bringing you the How to Tank for Dummies Protection Warrior Guide for patch 6.0. This guide is intended to give you everything you need to know for basic tanking and is aimed at people brand new to tanking. If you are already familiar with warrior tanking and just want to see the changes, click the annotation in the video now or the link in the description below to skip to the end of the video where I'll cover just the changes from Mists of Pandaria. Warrior tanks are exactly what you think. Big, beefy guys or girls that use shields and heavy armor to defend themselves and their group from the big bad meanies out there. They rely on blocking attacks and parrying with their weapons rather than completely dodging them, using their strength and fortitude to just shrug off damage. Before you go out hitting bad guys with your shield though, let's talk about setup. First, you'll want to select your talents. At level 15, you'll unlock your first tier of talents. Juggernaut, which reduces the cooldown of charge to 12 seconds from 20, Double Time, which allows you to charge twice in succession, and Warbringer, which changes the route of the charge to a stun. Honestly, all of these are useful in their own right, but I like to take Juggernaut just for the ease of use. Get plenty of quick charges out of it if needed, but don't have to worry about charges. And yes, that's the correct way to say it. Also, you can say, "I'm the Juggernaut" when charging, and technically be correct. Tier 2 unlocks at level 30 and includes Enraged Regeneration, which is a free healing cooldown, Second Wind, which gives you some lifesteal at low health, and Impending Victory, which will do some damage and heal you all at the same time. Just to get this one out of the way, do not take Second Wind. In its current state, it is worthless and will provide nearly no healing. Don't even worry about it. I assume they'll be changing this shortly, so keep an eye on it when it changes, if it gets a lot better. The other two are both relatively good overall, but I would suggest taking Enraged Regeneration, simply because it's a longer cooldown, so you actually don't have to worry about it as much. Just keep it around in case you take some damage to heal up nice and quick. Tier 3 talents will unlock at level 45 and include Heavy Repercussions, which increases Shield Slam's damage when Shield Block is up, Sudden Death, which gives you some free executes, and Unyielding Strikes, which reduces rage cost of heroic strikes with your Devastates. Honestly, I really like Heavy Repercussions because it's mostly passive, just increasing your damage when you're using Shield Block, and it turns out it's the best talent overall if you do end up using Shield Block a lot during the fight. When we get further in the guide though, you'll understand that we might not always be using Shield Block, and if you don't use it, this talent is pretty much worthless. The other two talents are also good in their own right, but they do require you to change up your rotation slightly and click some other buttons. For beginners, I would say go ahead and take Heavy Repercussions since it's good overall and pretty mindless. Although an expert tank would really want to definitely look at other options depending on what they'll be fighting and change their abilities accordingly. At level 60, you'll unlock Tier 4 talents, which includes Stormbolt, a single target stun/damage dealer, Shockwave, a nice big AoE stun, and Dragon Roar, an AoE knockback and knockdown. Honestly, all 5 of these have some good uses, but my favorite and recommendation is Dragon Roar. Again, mostly because not only it does the best DPS of them all, but it has the longest cooldown, meaning you don't need to use it that often. Although it really should be used whenever it's off cooldown. Tier 5 talents will unlock at level 75 and include Mass Spell Reflection, which reflects bad spells back at the enemies for your entire group, Safeguard, which lets you block attacks on an ally, and Vigilance, which is a damage reduction cooldown for your friends. For most fights, Vigilance is the way to go, as it will reduce a lot of damage for a good amount of time. Mass Spell Reflect is very situational, since most abilities from bosses actually can't be reflected, and Safeguard is good for when you know specific people will be taking damage frequently. Overall though, I say Vigilance is probably your go-to pick. At level 90, you unlock your Tier 6 talents, which include Avatar, which increases your damage and removes crowd control on you, Bloodbath, which adds a DOT and a slow to your attacks, and Bladestorm, which deals some AoE damage and makes you immune to most crowd control. All 3 of these are really usable with different effects, but I like Avatar, again because it has a long uptype, 24 seconds of increased damage, holy cow, and, like I said, a long cooldown. So you just have to pop it for bonus damage and then keep doing your thing. It also works to stop you from getting slowed or snared, letting you stay mobile in certain fights that you normally couldn't. Bloodbath has slightly higher DPS, and Bladestorm has great AoE, but again, I like Avatar for the simple, hey, let's do some extra bonus damage here, and I only have to use it once every couple minutes. No big deal. When you hit level 100, you'll unlock the final tier Tier 7 talents, which include Anger Management, which reduces the cooldown of a lot of your abilities when you spend Rage, Ravager, which throws out a little AoE, and Gladiator's Resolve, which makes your defensive stance stronger and gives you Gladiator stance instead of Battle stance, which increases your damage dealt. Honestly, I don't know which one of these is best at the end of the day because I don't have the theory crafting research and I can't find any articles on it, but for beginner tanks, I can almost assuredly say that Gladiator's Resolve is a great option. It increases the reduction of damage on defensive stance by 5% at all times, and Gladiator stance is kind of cool to do some extra DPS, although you can't switch in and out of it, so it's kind of a situational thing. If you ever need to switch to DPS and you don't want to switch your spec, hey, just switch to Gladiator, you're fine. And that go ahead and covers pretty much all the talents, so let's do a quick rundown. I recommend Juggernaut, Enraged Regeneration, Heavy Repercussions, Dragon Roar, Vigilance, Avatar, and Gladiator's Resolve. Dragon Roar you should use pretty much whenever it's available. Vigilance as a nice defensive cooldown when your friends are going to be taking damage or when you need to taunt a lot of things. Avatar basically when it's available unless you're going to get rooted somehow during the fight. And Enraged Regeneration whenever you need a slightly bit of healing. Most of the time you can use these active abilities whenever they're available and you'll probably be fine. Now that we've covered talents, let's go ahead and discuss glyphs. You have 3 major glyph slots and 3 minor glyph slots. The best glyphs for your major slots are Glyph of Bull Rush, which causes charge to make more rage, which will let you start most fights with slightly more rage to use. Glyph of Wind and Thunder, which will make your thunderclap bigger and hit more things. This is very useful, especially when fighting lots of adds. Glyph of Gag Order, which will turn your heroic throw into a silence, giving you a nice ranged interrupt. I always like those. And Glyph of Rude Interruption actually could be useful as it increases damage you deal when you interrupt something. The only problem is that you have to actually be the one who does that interrupt. So if your whole group is interrupting, and they interrupt slightly before you interrupt, then you won't get any benefit out of it. Glyph of Unending Rage is fantastic since it increases the maximum rage you have. This will let you have more rage at once, letting you pull off double slams, shield slams, or even a shield slam with a shield barrier. I guess shield block with a shield barrier at the same time. It's really not mandatory, however, as most of the time you'd rather spend the rage whenever it's available on either heroic strikes or doing something specific, and you really should never be hitting max on rage anyway. The Glyph of Shield Slam is actually a very situational glyph, dispelling a magic effect whenever you slam an enemy. It can be useful at times, but I really don't. I think most of the time it's going to be a waste. Glyph of Shield Wall will reduce damage taken by an additional 20%, but add 2 minutes onto the ability's cooldown. I really only would use this if you're going to be tanking very infrequently, but maybe infrequent but massive spikes of damage, or if you need it for specific mechanics in an encounter. Glyph of Resonating Power is actually really awesome. It increases the damage and cooldown of your thunderclap by 50%. So it's just awesome. It does so much more damage, and it does a lot of, you can do a lot more frequent thunderclaps in there. This really is only good if you're going to do AoE tanking, but if you are tanking any adds at all, this is really going to be helpful just to help out with that, big AoE damage stuff. So as far as glyphs go, I would suggest my favorites are Resonating Power for the increased AoE, then maybe Bull Rush, and then finally Unending Rage, because you can always use more rage. For your minor glyph, most of them don't matter at all, but I would recommend taking the Intimidating Shout to make sure mobs you yell at don't run away and bring their buddies back. This will make them cower in fear instead of running away. Now, let's get down to brass tacks and talk about the abilities you'll be using and the buttons you'll be pressing. Your main abilities are Shield Slam, Revenge, Devastate, and Heroic Strike. Shield Slam is your bread and butter skill, dealing straight damage and giving you lots of rage as long as you're in defensive stance. Just to be clear, you'll always be in defensive stance. It's your number 1 skill to use, and will even get its cooldown reset randomly by some of your other moves. Maybe one of your other moves. Revenge is another standard move that hits your target and 2 extra targets. Normally it has a long cooldown, about 9 seconds, it's relatively long. But if you parry or block an attack, its cooldown gets reset. Use it whenever it comes up. Devastate is your filler move, just to do some damage on your target. It costs nothing and has no cooldown, so spam it whenever you have no other buttons to press. Even better is that Devastate will sometimes reset your Shield Slam cooldown, so spam, spam, spam. Heroic Strike is your rage dump. If you don't know by now, warriors build up rage with their moves, and then you can spend it on some abilities to do damage or avoid damage. Heroic Strike is one of those moves. It deals a bunch of damage and costs 30 rage. Normally you don't want to use this unless you have lots of extra rage, but it is a great way to spend that rage and increase your threat. Heroic Strike is something you want to have handy, but I'll be honest, you won't be using it much unless you're doing raiding and off-tanking, so you can use it when you're not doing your active mitigation damage reduction moves. Still, when it lights up, it gets free, and is a guaranteed critical strike, so use it especially when it lights up. Speaking of those damage reduction moves, there are two other major abilities that cost rage: Shield Block and Shield Barrier. Shield Block lets you block all the attacks for the next 6 seconds with your shield, reducing damage taken by quite a bit. While Shield Barrier creates a damage absorption shield on you to soak up damage. To be clear, these both cost a lot of rage, and pretty much can't be used together, so you have to decide which to use at specific times. If you took the Heavy Repercussions talent, this is where you'll be using it. Whenever you use Shield Block, you'll be doing more damage when you do Shield Slam. Now, let's talk about these moves in a bit more detail real quick, as they are what truly define the warrior tank. And honestly, understanding these two moves is going to be the critical way to get better at being a warrior tank. Now, Shield Block works on a charge system, giving you 2 charges or uses of the ability, costing each costing 60 rage, with a new charge coming back every 12 seconds. Since it lasts 6 seconds, this effectively means that you can't always have Shield Block available. Shield Barrier, on the other hand, costs 20 rage for a small damage-absorbing shield. If you have more than 20 rage, it'll take more rage, all the way up to 60 rage to give you a bigger shield. This means you can use it actually quite often, or you can save up rage to use it for a big shield. For newer tanks, let's explain it like this. You want to use Shield Barrier nearly all the time, except when tanking a lot of physical hits, for which you'll want to use Shield Block. This means that the only time you really want to use Shield Block is when you're fighting lots of adds, or when the boss gets enraged, or something like that, and starts hitting you repeatedly with his fists or his weapons. Deciding on which to use where is really an encounter-by-encounter decision, but I would suggest having Shield Barrier in your main rotation, and then using Shield Block as an insurance policy when you need it. Now there is one more move that we haven't talked about that you'll be using quite a lot: Execute. This is a move that is only available when your target is below 20% health, and costs rage to use, but it's a big damage boost. Basically, it replaces Heroic Strike if your target is low health. The only difference for when you're fighting lots of adds is that you'll want to use Thunderclap whenever it's available. This is a big AoE that will deal some damage and hold aggro on groups of mobs. Otherwise, you'll be doing your standard rotation. Do remember to use any AoE talents that you might have selected when tanking. Lots of adds like Dragon Roar, Shockwave, or Blade Storm, as those will really help hold that threat. Okay, now that we've covered the basic abilities you'll be spending most of your time pressing, let's cover those big cooldowns. I won't be covering the ones you get from talents like Enraged Regeneration, so be sure to include those on your bars somewhere as well. First up is Demoralizing Shout. This reduces all the damage nearby enemies do to you for 10 seconds, and is on a 1-minute cooldown. You'll want to use this definitely when you have a lot of adds around, or really just whenever it's on cooldown, since it's relatively short. The Last Stand is a great cooldown, which increases your max health by 30% for 15 seconds, on a 3-minute cooldown. It's great because you can use it right before you take a big hit to help tank some damage, or you can use it when you're low to heal up and give the healers a bit more room to breathe. Shield Wall is the biggin that blocks 50% of damage for 12 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. You need to use this in anticipation of big attacks or lots of strong adds, but it's better to use before you're low instead of after you're there. Spell Reflection, or Mass Spell Reflection if you took that talent, is a short cooldown but situational move. It reflects the next spell you take back at the attacker, which sounds awesome, but since a ton of spells actually can't be reflected this way, it's a hit or miss type of cooldown. My best advice would be trial and error, but feel free to use this whenever an enemy is casting a spell at you. It might work, who knows. Now that's it as far as defensive cooldowns go, but you also have one offensive cooldown, Berserker Rage. This basically gives you more rage, so use it whenever it's off cooldown for some nice hits in the face. Taunt is your taunt, funny enough. It'll make the target attack you for a few seconds, and if you deal any damage to them, it will make them switch to you as their primary target. If you don't do any damage to them after you taunt, they'll go back to their original target. Remember that when taunting at range. Mocking Banner is also a taunt, except for an area of effect. This is great for when there are lots of ads, as you can put your banner down and just automatically taunt them all, passively. It's not an immediate taunt, but it does work a little over time. Charge is a great ability warriors have and the best way to start the fight, especially if you have Glyph or Bull Rush for extra rage. Intimidating Shout will fear all enemies close to you. It works great if the ads in a fight can be feared, otherwise it really isn't worth the effort. Pummel is your main interrupt, which will stop some spells from being cast. Heroic Throw acts as a ranged interrupt, if you have the Gag Order Glyph. Heroic Leap is an absolutely fantastic mobility tool for warriors, allowing you to jump to a specified location. I try to use it all the time just for fun. Finally, outside of battle, warriors have two buffs to bring to a group. Battle Shout for attack power and Commanding Shout for increased stamina and health. Use both of these before every boss just to be sure. So now we've covered all the abilities, let's go back to remind you of your rotation. Shield Slam should be priority 1, with Revenge being priority 2. Both will get reset a lot during the fight, so watch for it. Heroic Strikes when you have lots of rage or it's shiny, and Execute if the target is low. Devastate whenever you have nothing else to do. Shield Barrier should be used when you're tanking and have a good amount of rage, and Shield Block should be used when you're tanking lots of ads or a bunch of melee hits. When tanking groups of enemies, cast Thunderclap whenever it's off cooldown, and use Mocking Banner for a group taunt. Warriors have quite a bit of abilities at their disposal, but their basic tanking rotation is fairly simple. Focus on the main abilities at first and ease your way into learning those utility skills later. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and cover the stat priorities for warriors. When gearing up in dungeons or raids, you'll want to look out for plate gear with specific stats. For warriors, the number one stat you'll want is bonus armor, as it increases damage reduction and attack power. Mastery is second, since you get more blocks and critical blocks with it, and critical strike will give you more parry chance with more rage throughout the fight. Versatility will give you a little bit of everything from damage reduction, increased shields, and more DPS. Haste will lower our global cooldown, meaning everything can be just a bit faster and you can do some more Devastate, so overall more DPS and rage. Multi-Strike will give us a few more attacks and potentially more rage and DPS. As for Strength and Stamina, more Strength is better than more Stamina for increased damage and block potential. I listed them in that order because it seems to be pretty much the best point by point. This could change after we know more, but I think bonus armor is tops, mastery is second, crit is third, and then versatility, haste, and multi-strike are all kind of at the bottom of the ladder. The last three still pretty much do the same things, as they're all kind of, hey, a little bit of passive mitigation, and a little bit of rage, a little bit of DPS, and a little bit of everything, which kind of means nothing overall. But I would say they're definitely the least of our concern. Hopefully you've enjoyed this guide for dummies. If you want to learn about what changed since Mists of Pandaria, stick around, as that's what I'll be covering from here on out. If you're here just for the basics, then go forward and conquer! Okay, I am honestly not 100% familiar with warrior tanking in Mists of Pandaria, but I can go ahead and discuss the changes that I'm sure of here. Bye-bye cleave, we hardly knew ye. You can glyph into it to make Heroic Strike hit two additional targets, I believe, but there's a lot of good glyph options instead of that, so whatever. No more Rallying Cry or Recklessness, so a few less raid cooldowns for Prot Warriors. Skull Banner's gone too. Battle Shout and Commanding Shout no longer give rage, and they last forever now, or at least an hour, so just use them before the fight. Don't even worry about it, you don't have to save it right before the pull. Crit now gives parry, and you'll likely be parrying more than you did before. Overall, I don't see a lot of major changes to Warrior's basic rotation, unless Shield Block or Shield Barrier are relatively new, or they've been changed significantly that I haven't noticed. Shield Block is up a little bit less frequently now, since it only have charges 12 seconds instead of 9 seconds. So you'll have to kind of play around with that, though. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this full tanking guide for the Protection Warrior. Please check out my other guides as they come up for the other tanking specializations, and the dungeons and raids for the new expansion. Please like, favorite, share, subscribe, and, as always, you keep it salty, Internet.